morning and welcome to this month's presentation of the Emergency Management webinar series put on by this month a co-team of Esri and AccuWeather folks. My name is Chris McIntosh. I'm the Director of Public Safety Industry at Esri and the Emergency Management Industry Manager. I'm joined by Jeff Barani, the Technical Lead for Emergency Management here at Esri, and I'm Tyler Duvall, Don Koch, and Paul Raymond of AccuWeather. And we're really excited to bring you this month's presentation, Weather and Why It Matters to You. So we're going to go through the same agenda. We're going to talk about the purpose of this webinar series, and then we're going to digress a little bit from traditional topics and actually talk about the forecast for this year. The experts from AccuWeather are going to share the severe weather outlook for the rest of the year, how the summer is going to look, the tropics, which I know especially you folks in the eastern part of the country are concerned about. And then we'll get into some solutions that will help not only depict what the weather is, but what the weather means to you and why the weather is important to your particular problems and challenges. So the title of this is Weather and Why It Matters, and we're really going to focus on the why it matters and how you can create information products that answer questions that you or maybe your executives have regarding weather and its impacts. So the purpose of this webinar series is to continually support emergency management disaster response customers from our public safety team, to make this on a regular cadence so that we have a regular form of communication to talk about new challenges, new solutions, new best practices. Topics vary. They could be very broad, like weather, or they can be very specific, like a particular application. Please, as always, let us know topics that you want to hear about, and we will put those on the agenda as in the future of this monthly series. I will also give you some updates from the disaster response program, so you can see the kind of things that we here at Esri are responding to and assisting with around the world. So for today, weather and why it matters.
Alrighty. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tyler Duvall. I am the expert senior meteorologist and the forecaster training manager at AccuWeather Enterprise Solutions in Wichita, Kansas. We're basically the severe weather headquarters of AccuWeather as a whole, which kind of makes me uniquely qualified to talk with you all about the severe weather outlook for the rest of the year. And really we're going to focus mostly on tornadoes. I know that wind and hail are large severe weather threats across most of this country, but when it comes to some of the costliest weather disasters, tornadoes really are on the higher end of that scale. Saw some recent numbers that basically say, if you get an EF1 or an EF2 tornado, you're talking about $1 to $2 million worth of damage. You get up to an EF4, all of a sudden you're talking about $73 million in damage. And then an EF5 tornado, so your strongest tornadoes, you're roughly talking about $715 million if they hit a populated area. So these are weather events that can cost, in some cases just as much, if not more, than a hurricane, a flash flood, things of that nature. So we're really going to focus on that portion of the severe weather outlook. And now that we've flipped the calendar to June, it's officially hurricane season as of yesterday. Yesterday was also the official start of meteorological summer. So I wanted to take an opportunity to show you what we're going to be looking for this summer. With regards to, average temperatures, precipitation, drought conditions, wildfires, and then also talk finally about the tropical outlook, looking at how many hurricanes, how many tropical storms we can expect, and where those are most likely to hit. So I'll start off first with a question for all of you. Did you know that there is such a thing as a tornado drought? Portions of California in the West have been dealing with a rainfall drought for many years, but there is another type of drought, the tornado drought, that most people didn't realize that we were in just a few years ago. On average, we usually see right around 1,200 tornadoes every year, but between 2012 and 2014, we were averaging about 300 below that. Now, last year, we thought that we were going to jump up, be closer to 1,200 tornadoes, and we actually ended up with roughly around 1,177 tornadoes, which is a pretty close forecast and kind of a return to average. And then when we move forward, and you can advance the next slide, and when we look at the monthly tornadoes from last year, you can see that in the beginning we started out with pretty meager numbers, but then we got into the spring severe weather season, April, May, and June, and those tornadoes numbers, really took off, especially in May when we saw 381 tornadoes. Things kind of fell back through the summer months, as they tend to do with tornadoes, but most people don't realize there's a secondary peak in the severe weather season that occurs in the fall and the early winter months. Usually that is an area, basically, let's say the Ohio River south is usually the prime area. Also areas in California, that's when you most likely see, a majority of your tornadoes every year. And last year, from September through December, there were 200 tornadoes across the United States, which is twice as much as we would normally see. And it was really in December that we saw two of our strongest tornadoes for the entire calendar year. You can advance. So those two tornadoes were the Holly Springs tornado in northern Mississippi 2 days before Christmas, and then the Garland Rowlett tornado east of Dallas the day after Christmas. The only other EF4 tornado was in Roselle, Illinois, early in April. But overall, you're only talking about 21 out of 1,177 tornadoes that were EF3 or EF4. There were no EF5 tornadoes last year. And when we look forward at the forecast and the things that go into it, such as El Nino and La Nina, you can see that, these lower end tornadoes, a lot of them is due to the fact that in an El Nino, you tend to get weaker tornadoes, but we'll discuss that here shortly. You can go to the next slide. And so the question is, has the tornado drought ended? Does 1 year of near average tornadoes basically wipe away 3 years worth of below average tornadoes? And so to be able to look at that, we have to have a group of forecasters that aren't looking at the next few weeks, but that are looking months in advance. You can go to the next slide. And so in order to create these forecasts, these long-range forecasts, we have a group of meteorologists that are looking, the forecast I'm going to show you here shortly for the severe weather season was made in December of last year. The hurricane forecast that we'll show you was made a couple months ago. So you're talking well in advance of when you would normally be expected to be able to forecast these types of events. They're using a whole bunch of weather models, historical trends, analog years, a massive amount of geophysical and atmospheric data, sun, phases, all sorts of things, volcanic eruptions. They're taking all of this into account. They're looking at weather models to be looking at things like El Nino and La Nina, these huge circulations in the atmosphere and the oceans of the world that help drive our weather patterns here in the U.S. And so they go back in the history books. They try to find years that match similarly to the current year, and we call those analog years. Next slide. And so when we look at these analog years, we try to find ones that are pretty close to this current year, figure out what those years had temperature and precipitation-wise, and then try to create a forecast based on that. So you can see some of the analog years that we had picked this year. They're all fairly close. This year is kind of difficult because the way that the circulations and the oscillations are setting up, it's kind of like one we've never really seen. So it's rather difficult to pick an exact match to this year. But the closest we can come to is 1998. Basically 1998 is as close of a match as we can get this year. Mostly that has to do with the fact that the winter of 1997 and 98 had a very strong El Nino, very similar to the one that we just had this last winter. Maybe some of you heard it referred to as the Godzilla El Nino. So those types of things are what we're looking at to try to find analog years. And in order to look at the forecast going forward, we need to be looking at El Nino and what it means both with regards to severe weather, but also what it means with regards to tropical. Next slide. So the El Nino Southern Oscillation, I'm going to go through a quick science lesson to get everybody on the same page, but the INSA refers to the effects of a band of sea surface temperatures that develops off the west coast of South America that are anomalously warm or cold for long periods of time. Warm periods we call El Nino, cold periods we call La Nina. And now, if we have no anomalous readings, we call that a neutral phase. Now, the severity of the temperature departure away from normal tells us whether we have a strong, moderate, or weak El Nino or La Nina. Now, last year, like we just talked about, last year was the Godzilla El Nino. It was the strongest El Nino that had been recorded since the late 90s, since the winter of 97 and 98. And so it plays a huge role on our weather patterns here in the U.S. So now we need to see how is that going to hold. Is the El Nino going to disappear, or is it going to hold strong for the rest of the year? Next slide. And so this graph on the right is a probabilistic forecast for El Nino. The red bars are designated as El Nino, green bars are neutral phase, and blue bars are La Nina. And you can see that as we move forward in the year, those red bars disappear rather quickly and are overtaken by the blue bars. So we are only going to be seeing El Nino conditions probably for the next month. It actually disappeared at an historic rate. It was the strongest we had in a while, and now it's gone. So it didn't take long, it didn't want to stick around, and now it's being replaced by a La Nina. And that's going to drive a lot of what we see the rest of the year with regards to severe weather, but more importantly, what it's going to drive with regards to tropical systems. And so we can look at El Nino and La Nina and kind of see what we expect to see with regards to tornadoes in these types of patterns. Next slide. And so in an El Nino, you generally get a decreased number of tornadoes across the U.S. Mostly that has to do with the fact that in an El Nino, the subtropical jet, so the strongest winds in the highest part of the atmosphere that drive storm systems, well, that subtropical jet is what brings storm systems to the southern half of the country during an El Nino. And they're generally weaker in their strength, and so you tend to get less tornadoes, fewer tornado outbreaks, and as a whole, you tend to see weaker tornadoes. Well, in a La Nina, that whole thing flips, and now it's the polar jet that is stronger. And so you start to see tornadoes farther north into the Midwest and Ohio Valley compared to El Nino years. You also tend to get stronger storm systems. With the cold air coming in from Canada and the warm Gulf air coming in from the Gulf of Mexico, you tend to get stronger storm systems. So you see more numerous tornado outbreaks. You see stronger tornadoes on average. In La Nina years, you get more tropical development, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And with tropical development, hurricanes and tropical storms, you tend to get more tornadoes with those as well. So in a La Nina year, that's going to drive basically the forecast for the rest of the year. Go to the next slide. And so this is kind of an idea of what we can expect through the rest of the year. So far, May really ended with a flurry of tornado events across the Central Plains. The Dodge City tornado, the tornadoes in northern Kansas from just last week. That type of thing is going to continue. I think that, over the next week or so, really we're going to have to deal with the flooding in the Southern Plains over, through the rest of this week. By this weekend, we're talking about a system moving through the upper Midwest into the mid-Atlantic from basically Friday through Sunday. That is going to bring the potential for severe wind, hail, and the possibility of tornadoes. Then we take a short break early next week, and then we pick back up again late next week into next weekend. And I think that type of trend is going to continue, where we see 3 or 4 days of severe weather, then we see 3 or 4 days of calm weather. And it's just going to continue that way through the rest of the spring through June. As we get into the summer, pretty much anywhere east of the Rockies is open for business with regards to severe weather. Generally, in the summer, you're talking about more wind and hail threats, but you still do have a tornado threat. Usually that's the northern plains, upper Midwest, Great Lakes, and Northeast. And then once again, as we move into the fall and the La Nina begins to strengthen, we're talking about a secondary peak of severe weather and tornadoes this fall. I think it's going to be very similar to last year, maybe even a little bit more, across mostly, the eastern 2/3 of the country, but south the Ohio Valley. It's really hard in those seasons to get more moist air to get all of that far north. But I do think that we're going to have the possibility of a really strong secondary peak in severe weather. And then, of course, California, most of your tornadoes occur in November and December. So that secondary peak is going to need to be watched as well. And then when we talk about numbers, the easiest way to try to forecast out how many tornadoes we can expect to see in a year is by looking at an analog year. And so I wanted to do a comparison of 97 to 98 to last year and this year. And so when we do that, you will be able to see, you can go to the next slide. You can see that the number of tornadoes between last year and 1997 was pretty close. And if you look below at that graph, anything above a 0 is an El Nino, anything below a 0 is a La Nina. And this kind of shows you what the ENSO, the El Nino Southern Oscillation, did with time. And then when you get to our last known measurement, you can get next. You can see that, we're matching pretty darn closely with what happened with the arc of the El Nino from last winter and the arc of the El Nino from 97 and 98. And as we go forward, hit next slide, you can see it matches pretty closely in the forecast to what happened in 97. And so we can make, an estimation that the number of tornadoes that occurred in 1998 will match pretty closely to the tornadoes that occurred this year. Well, in 1998, we had over 1,400 tornadoes across the U.S. You get next. And so you can see it's less about the fact that there was 1,400 tornadoes. That's the fourth most tornadoes to have occurred in a year in the last 60 years. But to me, it's less about the number and more about the increase from 97 to 98. You can see there's a marked increase. And so going forward, you would estimate that there's going to be an increase from last year to this year. So last year was 1,177, and you can hit next. This year we're talking about 1,225. So it's not as much of an increase as what 97 was to 98. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that April and May had below average tornadoes for this year. But we think, June is going to remain pretty much close to average. June and July, you roughly see about 300 tornadoes every year. So that's going to add to our number. And then as we get into the secondary severe weather season, we're going to see more tornadoes out of that. And then we'll talk a little bit later about how there's going to be more tropical development, and that's going to lead to more tornadoes. So getting back to 1,200 tornadoes is going to be pretty easy this year. And you can go to the next slide. And so you can see that, with a return to average, we have basically broken out of that drought. And if the forecast models are correct going forward, this type of active severe weather season is going to continue through the rest of the year, or for the next couple years going forward. So the tornado threat is definitely something that we're going to have to worry about. And the complacency that kind of set in with a bunch of people during that 3-year tornado drought, hopefully people are starting to get out of that and realizing that tornadoes still are a threat here in the U.S. And so now I want to talk more about another type of drought, the drought that we have been dealing with across the U.S. For probably the last 3 or 4 years. For the longest time, it was in Texas. That shifted west and has been in California for a while. You go to the next slide. And it's these types of images that have become synonymous with summer here in the U.S. over the last several years. And going forward, you're going to see this type of situation continue. We think that the drought is not really, especially in the West, isn't going anywhere anytime soon. And in fact, it'll probably start to expand across the northern parts of this country through this summer. You can go to the next slide. And so here are the temperature departures for the summer months from June through August. So this shows you what temperatures on average will be compared to what they normally are. So you can see above average temperatures in the Pacific Northwest, the Northern Rockies, and even stretching east across the Northern Plains into the Great Lakes. Pretty much everywhere in this country, aside from the Southern Plains and Florida, is going to see near, if not above average temperatures this year. So it's going to be a hot one, hotter than what we have been seeing, especially across the upper Midwest and Great Lakes. That includes cities like Minneapolis, Chicago, Detroit. So these are things that we're going to have to worry about as we go into the summer months. And next slide. And then precipitation-wise, whenever you get, a transition to a La Nina, you tend to get more high pressure building in the west and in the northern plains, and that's what gets you above average temperatures, and it also gets you below average precipitation. So areas out west that need the rain are not going to get it this year. Areas in the northern part of the country that have had average rainfall over the last few years, if not above average in some cases, is going to see a departure from that and dropping back to below average precipitation, which in a way will help down the line to mitigate any sort of drought risks, but this is still something we're going to have to keep a close eye on. In the south along the Gulf Coast, you're talking about more tropical development, so that's what's going to drive the above average precipitation. Basically, areas that don't need any more rain are going to get it this summer, and areas that could really use the rain won't. So it's going to be more of a status quo going forward. And all of this lack of precipitation, of course, drives your droughts. Can you go to next slide? And so you can see out west, the drought conditions are going to worsen. There was some, reversal of the droughts in Northern California and the Pacific Northwest last year. And then in Southern California and the desert Southwest, there was actually no reversal whatsoever, which was a little unexpected with a El Nino pattern. But they down there didn't get very much rain. And, really the state of California is hurting pretty bad with regards to drought. Almost half of the state is experiencing a drought right now of an extreme nature, and that's only going to continue to worsen through the rest of the summer. The Pacific Northwest, all the rain and snow from the spring and the winter was great. It helped increase soil moisture and vegetation. But as we get later in the summer and the vegetation begins to die because of the lack of rain, now you're talking about more of a fire weather risk towards the second half of the season. The northern plains, Great Lakes, interior Northeast, those areas generally have seen above average precipitation or near average precipitation. So I don't think you're talking about a widespread drought, but you're talking about some drought conditions beginning to emerge across these parts of the country. That also is going to occur in the southern high plains. And then, of course, where they don't need rain, they're going to get more of it in the southern plains, lower Mississippi Valley, southeast, and in the coastal Carolinas. And then, with below average precipitation and worsening drought conditions, you also have to think about fire weather. Next slide. And you can see the northern half of the country is going to be under a higher wildfire risk than what they would normally have seen. And then even more so probably in the west. California, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, Arizona, those western states are really going to have to battle with the wildfires this year. In a La Nina, as we move forward, you tend to get stronger storm systems, so you will get brief periods of rain that come through the area, but overall it's going to be these systems have more wind with them in general, and so you're talking about more wind, drier conditions, a fire can spread very quickly, as we saw in Fort McMurray in Canada. These types of conditions are going to be present in the West as we move forward through the rest of the summer. And next slide. And so when you put it all together, here's a kind of a highlight of what we can expect this year. Drought out west, hot and dry farther north, the Ohio River Valley, the upper Midwest, Great Lakes, interior portions of the Northeast, more shower and thunderstorm activity in the plains and with the monsoon in the Four Corners region as we get later into the summer. And then I want to focus on that area along the Gulf Coast, the August tropical threat. That's really going to be in August when things start to pick up. I wouldn't be surprised if there is actually a tropical storm in the Gulf by this weekend, by Sunday or Monday, coming up through the across the Yucatan Peninsula, intensifying in the Gulf Coast region, and then moving through and making landfall in western Florida as either a tropical depression or a tropical storm early next week. So probably Monday or Tuesday of next week, we could be talking about our third named system of the year, which leads me into the tropical forecast. Next slide. And so the tropical forecast going forward is going to be really dictated a lot by the La Nina conditions. Yesterday was the official start of the hurricane season. And we talked earlier about a tornado drought. Then we talked about a rainfall drought. And now I'm going to talk about a hurricane drought. Next slide. So since 2010, only 4 hurricanes have made landfall in the continental U.S. And the last time a major hurricane, so a Category 3 or stronger, so that's sustained winds of 111 miles an hour. The last time that a Category 3 hurricane struck the U.S. was back during the Bush administration in October of 2005, and that was Wilma. 2005 was a pretty big year. We had 4 major hurricanes make landfall: Dennis, Katrina, which we all remember, Rita, and Wilma. And Wilma was, the last one of those to make landfall in Southwest Florida on October 24th. So it's been 10.5 years since a major hurricane struck the U.S. Wilma is actually the last hurricane of any strength to strike Florida. So you're talking about, a streak that is record-breaking. It's the longest streak we've seen since records began in 1851. The last time Texas saw a landfalling hurricane was Ike in 2008, and that was a Category 2 storm. So, the Gulf Coast region has not had to deal with that many hurricanes making landfall, and so that's one of our worries going forward. I saw a recent NASA study that said this type of drought only occurs once every 177 years. So eventually that drought has got to break down. More than anything, we've just gotten lucky to this point. There have been storms. I think we all remember Sandy. We all remember Irene. But we've just gotten lucky. It's not like there haven't been hurricanes out in the Atlantic that have been capable of hitting us, like Joaquin, but we've just been lucky to the point where they haven't actually made landfall. And an interesting piece of information that has come out of this hurricane drought is that actually President Obama is the longest serving president to not have a major hurricane make landfall during their term. Before that, it was only a couple years before a hurricane made landfall. But this year going forward, I don't think that he's going to be able to make it out of office without having a major hurricane make landfall in the U.S. And the reason for that is because of La Nina. And moving forward, we're going to have much more tropical development. Next slide. And so when we start talking about when this is going to occur, we started off, we just had Bonnie off the Carolina coast just a few days ago. We actually had Hurricane Alex in January in the eastern Atlantic. So we've already had 2 storms. I think by this time next week, we're going to have our 3rd storm. And then moving forward, especially as we get into August, September, and October, things are going to really pick up. Generally, your peak in severe weather season is the second week of September. This year, I think you're probably talking about a peak that lasts maybe 4 or 5 weeks, somewhere from the end of August through probably early to mid-October. There's going to be a large chunk in there where we see multiple storms at the same time, and at least development one after another. So this is going to be a year that we've really got to pay attention because things aren't going to drop off as quickly as the graph on the right shows. This is what you historically see after the peak. Well, this year, I think it's going to drop off, but we're still going to see tropical development through November and December. So you're talking about, more opportunity to have landfalling hurricanes. You can go to the next slide. And so when we start talking about where these are going to occur, that's the most important. A hurricane in the middle of the Atlantic that doesn't hit the U.S. Doesn't really affect what you guys need to deal with. But this year is going to be a little bit different. And the main reason for that is the tropical development region is not going to be in the central Atlantic. It's going to be much closer. You're talking about the Bahamas, the Caribbean, and the Gulf of Mexico. And so when you start talking about development that close to the U.S., you're talking about landfalls that occur, within 24 or 48 hours of development. So there's not a lot of time to prepare for these types of storms like you would normally see when storms develop in the central Atlantic. So these are going to be storms that catch residents off guard, especially those that have never had to deal with hurricane evacuations before, like, the increasing population in Florida. If people moved there in the last decade, they've never had to deal with what to do during a hurricane evacuation. So these are going to be, difficult situations with storms quickly intensifying, similar to Joaquin, went from a tropical storm to a Category 3 hurricane in about 36 hours. These types of storms are going to be developing very close to the U.S. mainland. And when we look at where analog years, hurricanes and tropical storms made landfall during those years, next, you can see that it's pretty much anywhere along the Gulf Coast, Florida, into the Carolinas. These are the areas of most concern. You get a tropical storm or a hurricane to develop in the Gulf of Mexico, there's a good chance it's going to hit something sooner or later. And this is the type of year that I'm concerned that we can be dealing with hurricanes and tropical storms moving into the Texas coast, which is going to exacerbate the flooding conditions down there. That is a real worry of mine moving forward, that Texas is going to have some struggles with regards to flooding pretty much through the rest of the year. One of these analog years and one of these analog hurricanes was Andrew in 1992 in South Florida. So we're talking about analog years that had really strong hurricanes that we're really going to have to deal with. Now, as you go farther north into the mid-Atlantic and the Northeast, there's still a threat, but it's less so. There's still the possibility of storms, but I'm more concerned about Florida and the Gulf Coast heading forward. Next slide. And when you're talking about the number of storms, we've already had 2. Like I said, by this time next week, I will think we'll have had 3. And we're forecasting basically above average number in every single category. And we're probably going to be on the top end of each one of these ranges. So more like 12 to 14 named storms, 6 to 8 hurricanes. Of those hurricanes, at least 2 to 4 of them are going to become major hurricanes. So, Category 3 or stronger with sustained winds of 111 miles an hour. And then you talk about, like we just spoke about before, you're getting development closer to the coast. So you're talking about more opportunities for landfalls. And so anywhere between 2 and 4 landfalls this coming year, I think there's a good chance that we'll probably be on the upper end of that range. And with the possibility of more landfalls and the possibility of more major hurricanes, it stands to reason that this is the year that our luck runs out, and that that major hurricane drought that we've been experiencing for the last 10 years is going to run out. And I think this will be the year that we see at least a Category 3 hurricane make landfall somewhere in the U.S. And that is the forecast pretty much for the rest of the year.
Well, thanks a lot, Tyler. Very useful insight into what is to come for the upcoming summer and tropical season. My name is Don Koash. I'm Director of Business Development here at AccuWeather. And I'm going to start off and tell you a little bit about AccuWeather, then show you some of the GIS weather layers that emergency managers have found very useful. AccuWeather provides weather monitoring and alerting services to around 250 of the Fortune 500 today. We also serve hundreds of schools, universities, state DOTs, and municipalities through our team of over 116 meteorologists watching out for our clients' concerns 24/7. We are the world's largest and fastest growing weather company, serving around 1 billion people per day worldwide with the world's most accurate weather information. Next slide. A recent report cited that weather-related disasters now cost $250 billion per year on a global scale, and 90% of all global disasters are caused by weather. Really staggering numbers. Just in the past 20 years, over 600,000 people have been killed by weather. AccuWeather is dedicated and focused on helping to protect people and property from hazardous weather by forecasting and warning for these high-impact disruptive events with enough advance warning to do something about it and to help organizations mitigate the risk associated with severe weather. Next. So how does AccuWeather help emergency managers? A number of different ways. First thing is being well ahead of the storm. Even before warnings are issued by government agencies, a lot of times we are giving our customers a heads up about major weather events. Then also providing the right weather information down to a local level. And then complementing that with visualization tools. So being able to see the warnings, the radar, storm path, weather observations, damage reports, hail swath, rainfall estimates in real time. And I'll show you some of those different weather layers. So what I'm going to share with you is some really unique solutions not available from NOAA. So next slide. So here at AccuWeather, we are very proud to be a longtime gold level partner with Esri. And all of our weather layers are specifically created to work very well within the Esri suite of products and platforms. Next slide. So the first one I'm going to talk about is National Mosaic Radar. It is a high resolution, half-kilometer level 2 U.S. NEXRAD radar that is stitched together across the entire nation. It's one file that is updated every 5 minutes, and you can animate it from the past 3 hours to current time, and then it updates every 5 minutes. So when you zoom in, what our customers really like about this is when you zoom in really tight into a city level, like in the example on the left, it doesn't become really blocky or pixelated like a lot of other options that are out there. So it holds that resolution as you zoom in, and you're able to really see the radar information very clearly. Next slide. The next one is the AccuWeather Storm Path. In addition to the radar layer that we just talked about, many of our users like the AccuWeather Storm Path, which is a proprietary algorithm that updates every 5 minutes depicting what types of severe weather is expected with each storm cell, and also denotes the movement of the storm. So if you see this cone here, it is broken up into 3 segments depicting where the storm is forecast to be in the next 15 minutes, 30 minutes, and 45 minutes, and that updates every 5 minutes. So note an example, if you can see kind of in the center of the screen, there's that red cone there. Aligns very nicely with the National Weather Service polygon warning. And it's kind of hard to see on this screenshot, but we also overlay and provide local storm report information. So you'll be able to see where the damage is being reported, where the National Weather Service warning is in effect, but also updated every 5 minutes where the Doppler radar is detecting the circulation inside the storm and where it's heading and where it'll be in the next 45 minutes. And then over on the right, you'll see the legend. So red is tornado, orange would be potentially severe thunderstorm, blue, dark blue is large hail, so it's depicting large hail. If you look at the bottom left part of that screenshot, you'll see the 45-minute extension of the cone there, and then the light blue There's a couple of examples of light blue in there for small hail, and then heavy thunderstorms, so nothing severe but just a thunderstorm. So we're able to break those out, and those are updated every 5 minutes. Next slide. One thing that is very useful for many of our emergency managers that we provide services to is our real-time lightning layer. We have this available worldwide, and it can display not only cloud-to-ground lightning, but also in-cloud lightning. And you can toggle between the last 5 minutes of lightning, last 15 minutes, last 30 minutes. You can display up to 45 minutes of lightning. So very useful tool, especially when storms might not be severe, but are producing a lot of lightning. Next slide. MinuteCast is something that's very unique to AccuWeather. We just launched this last year. It provides minute-by-minute precipitation forecasts for rain, snow, and ice, and it's available in the United States, Canada, Ireland, United Kingdom, and Japan, with more countries expected to come online in the next few months. And MinuteCast is predicting how intense the rain or the snow or the ice, and it'll depict if it's rain, snow, or ice, will be over your latitude, longitude, business, house. You put in an address, and it'll factor in where exactly it is the storm is relative to you. So it updates every 5 minutes off of Doppler radar. So it's really useful when you're trying to figure out timing of a storm at a particular location. I've seen a lot of our clients, they'll get this and they'll have this for multiple locations and have it on one screen, being able to display start and stop times of precipitation for areas of concern. Next slide. This next one is the ability to view hail swath information. So hail swath information is taking the Doppler radar VIL tracks and plotting that in real time. For some clients, it updates every 15 minutes. Other clients, they get it on a daily basis. However you want to receive this as far as frequency, we can deliver that. But what's really interesting about that is that we found that when you overlay the local storm report information, and that's some of the blue dots here, the light blue dots are storm reports coming in from people, storm spotters, local law enforcement, emergency managers are calling that information in. We plot that in real time, but then also display the hail swath, because not all the time do people report where the hail has occurred. Or it might not be reported in a timely fashion. So when you are able to overlay the Doppler radar interpretation of where the hail fell, in addition to the ground truth, it really is a useful tool to understand what areas got hit. So in this case, when San Antonio got hit earlier this year, you can quickly see it was the northern part of San Antonio that got hit. The southern part, southwest part, was spared, and then there was another swath over here to the southwest. So it really helps emergency managers allocate resources properly and understand where the impact area was and focus their limited resources in those areas. The next slide. The next slide is kind of similar to the hail swath, but it's looking at rain gauge adjusted Doppler radar estimates. So sometimes the Doppler radar will incorrectly estimate rainfall. So we have an algorithm that we can run it through that's adjusting that, especially if there's large hail and things like that in a storm. It can be way off if you just use it without any modification. So we run it through an algorithm that adjusts it based on what's really fallen into rain gauges and adjusts that in real time. And that's another great layer that gives you the ability to have a GIS layer, zoom in real tight to your jurisdiction, be able to see where the heaviest rain has fallen, and then also, once again, overlay the local storm reports so you can really see where does the ground truth match the Doppler radar estimates and maybe where it isn't. So it gives you the ability to really hone in on neighborhoods that were affected and down the street level on where the heaviest rain has occurred. Next slide. So up until now, I've been talking about some of the things that we currently have available. One thing that we're really excited about launching, and it's going to be available in the ArcGIS marketplace towards the end of this month, by the time for the Esri user conference, we expect it to be ready, is Future Radar. And it updates every 15 minutes, and it goes out for the next 2 hours. So every 15 minutes, we're updating and showing what the radar will look like in 15-minute increments going out 2 hours into the future. So we're really excited about that capability, and we'll be launching that towards the end of this month. And next slide there, Jeff, and that is everything that I wanted to cover, and I'll turn it over to you, Jeff.
Great, thank you, Don. Now we'd like to take a minute and show you what some of these great layers and services from AccuWeather look like in practice. So first I want to start out by talking about where to go and get access to this information. So this is available from the ArcGIS marketplace. So marketplace at arcgis.com, and here I've searched for AccuWeather, and I can see all of the great offerings, the severe weather offerings that are available from AccuWeather. We've got information that's available, not only for the U.S. but Canada, Europe, and more parts of the world are coming all the time. There are two new recent entries yesterday, and as Don just mentioned, there'll be a lot more additions that will be made to these marketplace entries before we get to the user conference. So once you've provision this information and purchased your subscription here, this is what things would look like. Now this information, these services, now become available to your ArcGIS Online accounts. And these map services, as you see here, can be made available inside your groups, and you can start to leverage these great sets of services inside the maps and apps that come with the ArcGIS platform here very quickly. So for example, if you want to build a operations dashboard here, something that you want to run unattended in your command center and your emergency operations center to give you a sense of what's going on either throughout the world, throughout the United States, or through your jurisdiction, you can configure these map services that are available here from AccuWeather, combine these with your critical infrastructure information, your assets, and really even kind of focus them into the areas that you talk about. As Don mentioned, this MinuteCast data is also available here in this environment as well. As you simply click a point on the map or type in your location, and now it can go out and search and give us a sense of what's going on the ground. Poor Texas has been rainy, has experienced great amount of rain over the past several days, and we can see down to the minute how we can expect that rain to continue. So just here a really quick example of configuring some of the AccuWeather data inside the operations dashboard to get a sense of how weather may impact the things that you care about, your jurisdiction or your assets. Another way to look at this information is through things like the Story Map Journal. The Story Map Journal is a great way to present information for decision makers, for executives, and get that information available out there and for people to see. So in this case, I've configured a Story Map Journal here of the supply chain package of services. So for example, we can just simply flip through the pages here and see what's out there. We can see the storm potential for rain over the next couple days. We can see detailed data such as the storm path information that Don mentioned, and where we can expect to see storms of different types in the next 15, 30, or 45 minutes. The great set of meteorologists that were mentioned have a set of custom weather warnings and watches here that could provide great information on how your jurisdiction may be impacted. Local storm reports here tell us where weather has happened over the past 24 hours of different types. We can also look at current conditions, and notice here that these sets of current conditions are available here across the globe. And as we drill in here and get more details, zoom into different areas, we'll start to get more details of some of the information that's available here and accessible to us, and we'll start to get information that pops in on different forecast information, what the current conditions are, how the weather's blowing, and this is a global layer that gives you access to this information across the globe. And then finally, as was discussed earlier, we can see from the tropical storm collection the remnants of Bonnie here in the Atlantic. So just in these cases, just kind of an example of showing some of this information in the context of a story map journal for briefing purposes. So this was the example of looking at the supply chain set of data. I also wanted to talk about some of the other information that's out there and accessible as a part of the severe weather solutions package. Here we can see the weather radar data for the US. In this case, I'm just looking at the US view. There's also data for, Canada, Japan, Europe, other parts of the globe are available here as well. And really high resolution, radar updated, very frequently, and gives us a sense of what's out there. Next, I want to talk about some of the other data sets that are coming that Don mentioned. So I want to talk about rotation tracks here for a second. So here we see an archive of all of the rotation tracks over the past year. These are, indicators from radar of where tornadoes may occur, and so this gives us a good sense of where things may be, going on in real time. There's no tornadoes yesterday, so I'm not able to show you that from the recent, collection. But if there were, they would show up. But there were recent hailstorms, yesterday. So as was discussed, now with inside, your GIS applications, you're able to see where those hailstorms, took place, where they potentially, impacted the jurisdiction, and give you a better sense of where that, impact, took place. So, for example, I'm here in our Denver office, and we had a pretty significant event, last week, last Tuesday on the 24th. There was a large hailstorm that moved through the area. So now you're able to take advantage of some of the analytic capabilities that come with the ArcGIS platform and give you a sense of what the impact of that storm may have had on the Denver area. We can see how many people were impacted, by the hailstorm, dig in and get more details on, how many people were actually, impacted, and get a sense of, a little bit more detail, the impact, on the area. In this case, in the most, where we had 2 inches or greater, we can see, how many children or seniors were in this area, just like we can do for many other types of events. Now we've kind of got that polygon, that, bad area to grab a hold of to start to do some analysis, on top of. And then finally, the last thing that I wanted to show here is, how this can really, kind of come together to give us more kind of focused, information. So by taking a look at here the weather radar data and the storm path data, we can use this in conjunction with geo-events to let us know how the facilities that we care about could be potentially, impacted. We're not seeing all of the facilities and all of the areas. We're just seeing, the couple of specific facilities, hospitals here in, Texas that are in their current, storm path, outlook. Some of the, key retail outlets like Walmart and how those are potentially, impacted. So now we can really apply the power of analytics of GIS with the great data that's available here from AccuWeather to give us some real actionable information on how our area or how some of the things that we care about could be potentially, impacted. And this is updated all the time. This is continuously running. So it gives us the ability to automatically, monitor some of these, facilities. And if we wanted, we could get, alerts, email, SMS messages when some of this information, comes through and gives us a sense in, in an automated fashion how our facilities could be potentially, impacted. So this, in my mind, this is a really powerful example of the power of the data provided by AccuWeather and the platform provided by Esri really can kind of come together to provide some, some real actionable information, really kind of get at, the heart of the purpose of today's seminar on weather and why it matters and where it matters the most. So just kind of wanted to give you a quick tour of some examples of how we can configure the ArcGIS platform to leverage a lot of the great data that is available here from AccuWeather. So I know we're running here a tad bit long. I did want to close out with a couple of other updates that we normally go through during our seminars, and we're going to stay on just a little bit longer today to answer more questions that have come in, from the audience. So just a couple things here to close out as we normally do before we open the floor to questions a bit more. And I know that many of you have been asking questions using our question, functionality here, and our great friends from AccuWeather have been working to answer some of those. And so continue to do that, and we'll pause here just another minute or two to answer some more questions this live. So a big update for our ArcGIS for Emergency Management Solutions templates are coming here in a couple weeks. The June update will have quite a lot of new things. There'll be a new series of basically updates to our special events set of templates called community events, really kind of helping you on the front side of planning for special events to coordinate, to get permits, to kind of walk it through the entire process. There'll be more templates that'll be added from the mitigation perspective to look at where mitigation projects are happening in your jurisdiction. More work in terms of analyzing a hazard vulnerability. Also wanted to mention that our old My Hazard Info app is going to be moved to mature support and is going to be replaced by a new ArcGIS web application builder template. So that's something that's coming. And additional updates have been added to a variety of the solution templates that you've been using. The Incident Analysis Viewer will be renamed to the Situation Awareness Viewer, and more things that you see here. So in a couple of weeks, check out the What's New section of the ArcGIS for Emergency Management solution templates. Also wanted to highlight some new apps that we've added to our disaster response program examples group. So Alabama Office of Water Resources and Floodplain Management has put together a great story map journal that talks about things before the storm. We've got some great examples from Massachusetts and the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency and how they've used the platform for a recent nuclear exercise. Also, some of the information from the Checkpoint 16 exercise from Spin Global and some of their partners that happened during the past month. So be sure to check out this group. We'll send out the links in the show email. In addition, we've been tweeting out some of these links during the course of the webcast. So please make sure to explore some of the resources that we've talked about today. Next month we'll talk about 10 steps for better disaster preparedness with ArcGIS Online. That'll be our July webcast right after the user conference. Contact us with any other questions, and hopefully we'll see many of you here in San Diego at the end of the month and the National Security Summit. Just real quick, if you are coming to San Diego, make sure to join us for the National Security and Public Safety Summit. That'll happen the weekend before the user conference. Lots of great speakers and presenters on really recent and relevant and timely aspects of applying GIS to this practice. Here's what our public safety and national security neighborhood will look like. It will have Ops Center again and many kiosks that are focused on many of the industries that you care about. We have several industry-focused, technical workshops from law enforcement to fire, emergency management. Also on Thursday afternoon, we're running a special workshop on preparing for and supporting special events with ArcGIS Online. Last year we did a zombie exercise, and this year we're doing special events, and I promise it will be fun and engaging after a long week, so please join us there. Many public safety demo theater presentations to check out, and we'll be sharing more details of these after the webcast, and then those are the special interest group listings. So let's turn it over to our group of presenters here, and wanted to ask if there's any common questions that you've been getting that we want to answer here at the end of our webinar. So let's just add in a couple of here, and I've seen some of that have come through the audience. We've talked about going to the marketplace to look for some of the information that is available from AccuWeather. We showed the MinuteCast widget, and that's a widget that's available for the operations dashboard, and that's something that can be configured into this information. There's a let's see. There's also been some questions about some of the algorithms that AccuWeather uses, and talk about some of the value that they provide on top of this. And it looks like that some of our AccuWeather friends have been answering some of those for you here directly, and talk about some of the advanced algorithms that they use, how they use several tilts of Doppler radar to provide additional information and that type of thing. So hopefully had your questions answered during the course of the webinar by our friends from AccuWeather, and we will try and follow up if we didn't get to all of your questions today. So that concludes the presentation that we had for you all today. We thank you for your time. We also special thanks to our friends from AccuWeather for providing us with this great information. I certainly learned a lot and learned a lot about what I need to be thinking about to be better prepared for the upcoming seasons, tornado, tropical, wildfire, and certainly lots of things to think about and lots of exciting ways to be able to leverage this great set of weather information inside the ArcGIS platform. So thank you all for attending, and we will talk to you next month.